Go ahead, Jack and Ellen.
Okay, I'm Ellen Miller, and obviously a lot of what I'm going to say, I hope Jack is going to repeat. We started beekeeping back in the latter 70s, so we too got to experience the joy of beekeeping without the diseases, and so little hands-on assistance was needed. It really was fun. We did it because we lived out in Spokane Valley, had a large garden, wanted to have bees there to help the garden and pollinate, and actually got so interested in the life of the bees and what bees did and their whole system of communication, of working, that we just became fascinated. Moved out to the West Plains from the valley, and very, very different environment. Probably in the Spokane Valley, you could have as many hives as would be allowed, where out here we're not quite as bad as Sherry's environment, but we can't keep more than probably 3 to 5 hives and expect them to be able to live off the forage in the area. So that was, as we kept 10 and 12 and kept not understanding what the problem was, it was, suddenly the light went on and, well, there's no food out here for them, duh. So cut back, and from now on, all we'll be doing is probably 3 to 5 hives. And 5 in this particular year would not be good, because I don't think we're going to get much of a nectar or honey flow because of the drought out in our area. Why don't you fill in the gaps, dear?
Oh, there's not too many gaps to fill in, but yeah, we've been keeping bees for a long time, and it was fun. There were, of course, diseases. I mean, we went through a course at the community colleges, and you learn about the various kinds of diseases, but we never saw the diseases. So we put the bees out. We went out in the late summer and harvested honey and put them away for the winter, and it was kind of fun. We experimented with all sorts of different ways to extract honey. That got to be kind of a messy mess until we finally decided to buy a commercial or regular built extractor. But it really has changed, and it's mostly these days a function of the viruses that are carried by the mites, and so you don't have a choice anymore. You have to control the mites, or you don't have any bees. So anyway, we've been doing this a while, and Ellen, she didn't mention that she's the vice president for the Washington State Beekeepers Association, and she's in charge of their education program. And so you'll hear her name throughout that manual that you've got. She wrote the book, so you get to ask her any questions that might come up. She's got the answers. She did the research, not me.
So I really appreciate hearing why you are interested in keeping bees and what your background is. We're going to try to tailor what we say during the presentations to what your interest area is. But please, as Mary said, interrupt us with questions, ask for clarification. We're really comfortable with that. Waving your hand because of our bandwidth, but among all of us, it isn't an immediate response. We don't hear you immediately. So that visual helps to know that somebody wants to say something. So we will acknowledge you as soon as we see that you are attempting to say something, and pause and make sure that the audio comes through. The same may be true for us in what you're hearing from us. So if there's a bit of a delay, hang in there. Theoretically, the words will be coming through as soon as possible. Any questions about that at all?
And again, the test goes with the manual, and you can find all sorts of different answers to a particular question on the internet. Of course, you can find any answer you want to anything on the internet. So when you do the test, it's just use the manual. but there are there's lots and lots of views on how to keep bees. So there's no it's not like mathematics. 2 + 2 is 4. No, 2 + 2 is 4, 8, 7, or 3. It's just all over the place with beekeeping. So don't if you've heard something else that's different from what we're going to tell you, you can bring it up, talk about it, see what our opinion is, and remember that it is just an opinion. Every beekeeper's got one or two or three.
The purpose behind the apprentice class, obviously, is for people that have already had experience with bees. So there's going to be a little bit of repetition on the points that we felt were important. And we don't know when people have taken the beginning class, when your experience with bees really was until today. So know that there will be a little bit of repetition, but we've tried to go into more detail than any of your beginning courses, offering more options, more choices, where in the beginning class, we tried to present a more clearer path to success with not a lot of the options, but what we have found to be most easily successful here in this area and throughout Washington State. So if there's anything that we're not covering in enough detail, please let us know. Jack and I have been known to go into excruciating detail, and so we'll watch the clock as well as we respond to that. Okay, if you're ready, Jack, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Let's see if we can get this to work. Computers, All right, I'm going to share a screen here. Where'd the share screen go? There it is. And we're going to try a PowerPoint here. And you should be seeing.
It may take a little while.
Yeah. Okay, and all right, it looks good on our side. You should see a slideshow now, and then you should see some little images of people. We're seeing a slideshow plus some notes and the images of people. So that's.
Is everybody seeing what Jack's describing?
Yes.
All right, I get a thumbs up from, okay, Brandon does?
Okay, we're seeing nodded heads. All right.
Okay,
There
great.
we go.
Super.
All right. All right. The honeybee. Well, this is pretty standard. The animal kingdom, the arthropods, the insect or hexa, the Hymenoptera, the Apis genus is how we always refer to most animals on the planet. We say the genus and we say the species. So the species here is Mellifera. There's 3 of these guys, by the way, under Apis. And Mellifera is the western honeybee, the one that we're familiar with. It actually originated in Asia, and then we brought it over to the U.S. When we colonized the place from Europe. This is not very exciting stuff, but each of these groups has something in common. So you get to Apis, and it's an insect. So that means what? It has 6 legs, among other things. So everything under insects is going to have 6 legs. Well, everything under Apis is going to be a honeybee of some kind. And then once you get into species, there'll be some races, I guess is what we call them these days, the Italians and Carniolians and so forth. So they're, if we look at, we can move over here. Insects they have what, 4 wings, and with a few cross veins. You'll see that in your manual. They can hook the wings together, so they often look like they just have a pair of wings, but they actually have 4. The hind wings are larger. They have mouth parts that are formed for biting and sucking, and they use those for both, gathering their food and defending themselves. The family itself, the Apidae, include bumblebees and other solitary bees. In fact, most bees are solitary bees. Very few bees are social. And they another thing that's unique is they have a long tongue. That's important for a lot of the pollination. Some insects have longer tongues than the honeybee does. So things like blueberries with the shape of the flower means that you need a little bit longer tongue than maybe the honeybee even has. But because the things like that, the blueberry was native to North America, the bees are native to Asia and Europe, so they're not exactly ideal for each other. Let's see, the genus Apis stores honey and uses wax to make their homes. So anything under Apis is going to be the honeybee. And lastly, we get the Mellifera. It is specifically the European honeybee, and it's from the Asian honeybee. I mean, it's from Asia. And the other Apis members are Apis cerana and the giant honeybee, Apis dorsata. And I don't know if any of you have seen pictures on YouTube or whatever of the dorsatas hanging from some branches, huge, colonies with a large number of the bees themselves are huge, and you see people harvesting honey from this, and they'll be hanging from ropes or doing ridiculous acrobatics to get to these things, and using smoke. It's just it's a crazy way to get honey. The Mellifera, the one we're used to, is not domesticated. Of course, it's a wild animal, but still, we've sort of got it under control because of our use of hives that are built specifically for the way it built for the bee space and so on. So anyway, the classification is pretty straightforward. It's in any textbook, and we'll just go on from there. Okay, so we got subspecies now. The attendants are the most common ones in the U.S. You can buy them just about anywhere. They're the yellow, the golden bee. By the way, when they were breeding bees back when, they tended not to breed for characteristics like overwintering or defense or hygienic. They tended to breed for color. So the Italian bees were the gold bees. The carnelians, the carnies, they're a darker bee. They're a bee that was developed in a higher environment, in the mountainous environment. So they're smaller. They tend to conserve their food a little bit better, so they don't need as much food to overwinter. They do have a tendency to swarm, and swarming is something that can be a plus and a minus. Everybody doesn't want their bees to swarm, because what happens when the bees swarm is that you lose production. You lose the bees and you lose honey production. And so beekeepers usually don't want bees to swarm. But swarming has some real benefits to the bees themselves. It breaks the brood cycle. It keeps things like the viruses under control. And it's, of course, the way that the bee propagates itself. So swarming, if it wasn't for us, for people trying to manage these things and gain the honey, is a positive thing for the honeybee. So a tendency to swarm is, for the bee a good thing. Now, Caucasians, they are also a mountainous bee. They're from the Caucasus Mountains on the Asian Europe border, and they also winter well. We found that they're a pretty gentle bee. They do make lots of propolis, but propolis, if you're a beekeeper, you might not like to deal with propolis. But if you're a bee, propolis has a lot of positives. It's generally used to coat the inside of the hive, to seal anything less than bee space, but it provides a lot of protection. It's sort of like an antibiotic coating inside the hive. So it's a good deal for the bee, just like swarming is a good deal for the bee. Now, the Russians, back when, I think it was 1922 or something, the U.S. put a ban on importing bees because of tracheal mites. So they were trying to keep tracheal mites from being imported into the U.S. So they made a law that says you can't import bees. Well, everything has a downside, and one of the downsides is that there's no genetic diversity now in the U.S. because we haven't allowed anything in for so long. They recognize this, and they did have a program back where the government did import some Russians to try to improve genetic diversity. So the Russian bee came in later. Now it's a dark bee. It's from Russia, obviously. And it also has a little more hygienic behavior. That is, it's a little more aggressive about getting rid of the mites. But you do hear stories about them being a little bit more aggressive than other bees. And I don't know. We've had Italians, Carniolians, and Caucasians, Sassafras, and some other, sort of proprietary races, but we've never tried the Russian. So I'll be interested. And I heard during the initial part that Isaiah and Megan got some Russians. So we'll be interested to see how they do with those and how they produce and whether or not they're as aggressive as some reports have been. And then lastly, there's the Africanized bees, which tend to be do well in a little warmer climate. So we don't see them up here in the north, but they're in the southern United States. They're now the bee that and there's no way to get rid of them. They do, reportedly they're not any more, their venom isn't any stronger than the regular honeybee. It's just that they're very defensive and very aggressive, and will follow people and chase them away longer. And they have a higher percentage of the hive involved in defense. So a good chunk of the hive can come after you if they're trying to defend their hive. So that is an issue, but for us here in the Northwest, it isn't really because we don't have them here yet, and probably won't have them because of the weather here. So any questions so far? Anything anybody like to bring up?
Brandon had a question for you about what your ask Brandon. You can ask it better than I can.
I was just asking what your most enjoyable breed has been.
Caucasians, for me anyway. What do you think, Ellen?
Well, I don't think that we have any pure breeds anymore. So there's particular hives or colonies that I've enjoyed working with and that have been productive and, non-aggressive and, have overwintered well. But it's more of a personality thing with that hive. It's the characteristics of that particular colony. And in each case in that colony, by looking at the bees, you can tell that they are a mixture of, very dark bee. There were some nice blonde, golden bees in there. They're a mixture. So for me, my favorite colony is one that has a nice mix, but a really strong queen, one that is viable, that has been well mated, and that is productive and has formed a strong colony around her.
Yeah, the trouble with these breeds is that you get one, and if you just have one, and you have a hive of one, you're going to try Russians, for instance, and you put it out there and you watch it, and then that's your impression of Russians. But you have to have a few dozen of one in order to see what they're like, because if you just have one, it's like just having one dog. That dog can be a great dog, and that dog could be a dog that's hard to train or aggressive or whatever, but it's that dog. It's not necessarily that breed. So it's very difficult to get an idea of any of these with just one hive, watching it to see how it does. You really need to have a lot of them over time in order to really make a judgment. And then even when if you buy a Caucasian queen, you go to the trouble of hunting them down and finding a supplier, and you get some. Well, as soon as they swarm, off they go with the queen you bought. Hopefully you caught her, but stick her in another hive. But the one that's left behind now is going out and is meeting with the local bees, and they're going to be a dozen or so bees that she'll meet with, and there'll be all sorts of bees. There'll be any of the above, the Italians, the Carn, So now you'll have a whole bunch of a sperm in this bee, and it'll start laying. And when it lays, it tends to lay in layers. And so for a while, you might be getting a cross between a Caucasian and a Carny. And then all of a sudden, you'll start getting a cross between a Caucasian and an Italian. And then maybe she might have found another Caucasian. So now you might be seeing Caucasians. The point is that they're mixed, and how they act and what species they are or subspecies they are is even going to change over the course of the summer as the queen goes through different layers of sperm. So it's which is the best? Well, you're going to get all of them pretty much no matter what you try, I guess is the answer. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Okay. This is one of the fun things about bees. Bees are one of the most eusocial animals on the planet. And eusocial just means that they act as an organism. The hive itself acts as an organism more than the individual bee acts as an organism. The hive, the individual bees can't survive without the hive. The hive is kind of the creature. So they live together in a group if they're eusocial. They have cooperative brood care. What in this case, it just means that they have a division of labor. They have castes, so that one caste, like the worker bee, is a caste that does certain things, and like the drones can only do certain things. They can't do everything, and so they need the help of each other to form an entity that works. So the drones can't even feed themselves. They need to be fed and pampered if they only have one job. The worker bees have a whole series of jobs that we'll go through from the time they're born until the time they become field bees and die. And then another big thing is that there's generations in the organism if they're eusocial. That is, there'll be in this case, there'll be eggs, there'll be larvae, there'll be bees doing all sorts of jobs, the field bees. And so there's young and old all working together. And lastly, there's in a eusocial organization, there's usually a division of reproductive labor. That is, the queen is the only bee that's laying eggs. Well, I shouldn't say that. The queen is the only bee that's laying worker eggs, fertile eggs. Because the worker bees are also females, and they can lay eggs. It's just that they're haploid, and so they'll all be drones. They can't lay a worker. A worker can't lay a worker. They can only lay drones. So anyway, that makes them eusocial, and that makes them unique among all. There's very few eusocial creatures on the planet. Most of them are insects. So there's a lot of literature on this particular characteristic of bees, and it's kind of fun how far they've gone, how far they've taken this idea of taking a group of things to be the organism as opposed to the individual. All right. And of course, you all know this next one is the colony consists of the worker, the drone, and the queen. Now, the queen, she's pretty busy. She can produce about 1,500 to 3,000 eggs a day. In fact, she can, on some days, she can actually lay more eggs than she weighs. And that's because, of course, she's being fed at one end and eggs are coming out the other end, and they're constantly feeding her, and she's constantly laying eggs. She's just almost an egg laying machine. That's her primary function in the hive, of course. She doesn't really, she isn't the queen in the sense of controlling the hive's behavior, only in the sense of emitting certain pheromones that say she's doing okay and the hive's doing okay, keeping the hive together in that way. But as far as deciding when to swarm, no, that's the workers. When deciding, even deciding whether or not to produce drones or not is more of a worker choice, because the workers make the cells and the workers guide the queen from one cell to another to lay eggs. And if they take her to a drone cell, which is a little bigger, she measures that cell and lays an egg and does not fertilize it, and it becomes a drone. So in fact, it is the worker who is very much involved in deciding how many drones the colony has. So the queen is mainly two functions. She lays eggs, and she produces a lot of pheromones that control the health and happiness of the hive. And to find her, the one here has a nice dot on her, and you'll see that, of course, if you buy a marked queen. But the bees will often clean it off, and if they don't clean it off, but once she swarms, she's gone, and there'll be one in there that's not marked. So finding her is just a matter of noticing kind of the behavior of the bees, because the bees around her, they call it a retinue. Is that how you say that? Anyway, they kind of act different. They're all kind of pointed at her, and they're kind of looking at her. And so you're looking for that behavior, as well as the fact that she's the big bee in the hive. Her abdomen is, of course, longer than the rest of the bees. So finding her in the hive is, kind of based on experience, looking for this behavior pattern, and then looking for the bee itself. Now, let's go to the drone. The drone, of course, has one job. That's to mate with the queen, and he he's a little more, he's kind of expensive for the hive to have a lot of drones. So they don't, you know, they have to feed him. And he is, the only thing he does is about 11 o'clock in the morning or so, he takes off and goes to some drone congregation area and flies around waiting for a queen to show up. If no queen shows up, he flies back about 2 or 3 in the afternoon and hangs out and gets fed. Next day he gets up and flies out to the congregation area, and he just does that day after day after day until a queen shows up. If he's lucky enough to mate with a queen, he immediately dies, falls to the ground, and that's his job's done. If it turns out that he never finds a queen to mate with, in the fall when resources are scarce, the workers don't need no drones around anymore. He's just a drag on the resources of the colony, so the workers take him and they haul him out the front door and throw him out. And of course, he can't feed himself, so that's the end of the drone. That's a drone's life. He has one job and he does it, and then his life's over. And then we get to the worker. The worker, the worker is, she goes, we're going to spend a lot of time on the worker later on, because we're going to go through all the things the worker does and when she does them. And, but basically a worker is created by a fertilized egg. So she's a diploid. She's got 2 sets of chromosomes, where the drone only has, I keep pointing at this thing and I know it doesn't make any sense to you looking at this. And I got to stop my hands from pointing to the screen that you can't see. But anyway, we're going to go into the worker a lot more later on, but they're the primary bee in the hive. They're about 85 to 90% of the bees in the hive. So almost every bee you see is going to be a worker. And you know, they go through things like, let's see if I can move some things here.
Is Mary waving her hand?
Is Mary waving? Oh, Mary's waving her hand. Go ahead. What are you saying? What do you need, Mary?
Actually, Brandon had a question for you.
Okay,
All right.
Yay.
Live. Yeah, I was just
Go
curious
ahead.
to why the drones don't mate with the workers. Are they incapable of doing that?
I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before.
Okay, and you know the answer.
Well, go ahead.
The workers do not have the orifice in order to mate. So it's only the queen that does. And she's the only one that expels the pheromone that says me, 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 me. So there's a couple of things that are going on, but they physically are not able to mate with workers.
All right, I figured there was some kind of restriction. I just didn't know what it was. That's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. So, so anyway, once the worker is you know, hatched, well, emerged, yeah. That when I say hatched, you usually think of that as the egg hatching, and the egg hatching happens about day 3 after the egg has been laid, but the pupa emerges. And when people say hatch, they're often talking about the fact that the pupa has emerged. So anyway, once the pupa emerges, they go through several tasks. And first, their job is they keep things cleaned up. They clean cells, and they take the dead bees and they haul them out and get rid of them. They remove diseased bees. They check for eggs. Like a new queen might lay a couple of eggs instead of 1 egg, and so in a cell. And so they'll go around and they'll clean out one of the eggs, and they'll do that simply by eating it. Of course, they don't waste anything. So then they'll clean out dead larvae and pupa. Then they become nurse bees, and they go through they're feeding the larva. And man, oh man, that's a job, because how many times do they feed the larva in a day?
1,300.
1,300. That's an estimate. I mean, it's 1,000 to 1,500, kind of thing. But they're feeding the larva all the time, because the larvae are growing at a rate that's almost unbelievable. They're 1,500 times bigger in weight when they pupate than they are when they pupate than when they were laid. I mean, and that's in what, 21 days. So, that's an incredible growth rate in a very, very short amount of time. And the way to get that growth rate is these nurse bees are literally feeding them. And then they're also attached to the queen. They feed her, and they, clean her, they groom her, they pull scents off of her and distribute throughout the hive. They do the attendant thing. They make wax, and they store food, and they do temperature control. They build comb. There's groups of them that just receive nectar from the incoming field workers and redistribute it and store it. And they do the same with pollen. They process the nectar over and over again and add enzymes to it, and then they reduce the water in it so that it becomes honey. They control the temperature in the hive by ventilating it and by fanning it. Then they become guard bees, and they protect the hive from intruders. Then they become, the last thing they do is they become a forager. And that's the last 3 or 4 weeks of their life. Once they become a forager, they've got about 3 or 4 weeks to live, because they simply wear their wings out, and then they're done. So let me see the drone. We talked about the drone. Oh, how do you recognize the drone? Well, he's pretty obvious. He's got that fat body and short body, and he's got those eyes that go all the way to the top of the head and almost join. So he's pretty easy to identify. On all bees, the male usually has more segments than the female on the antenna. So he's got 13, and the girls have 12. They, of course, don't have the carbuncula, I'm trying to point to it again. Okay. On their hind legs, there's on the worker bees, there's we call it a pollen sac. It's called a carbuncula. And by the way, when you're doing bumblebee identification, it's a thing that you always get looked at and checked out, because it's one of the identifying characteristics. But anyway, he doesn't have those. He has no stinger. He doesn't forage. He's pretty laid back kind of a guy. Now the stinger is kind of interesting. The stinger is a modified ovipositor, and it is barbed, of course, on the worker. And you know that when she stings somebody, it sticks in there, and when she pulls away, it leaves the muscles and the pollens, or the poison sac, and it keeps working, pumping poison in. But it also means that the worker dies. The female, the queen, her stinger doesn't have, well, it has tinier barbs. They're really tiny. So when she stings something, it doesn't pull out. And so she can sting multiple times. And her stinger is primarily used to sting other queens, so that she's the only queen. Let's see, what else do we know about queens? Oh, the other thing that's strange to me about the queen is since her ovipositor has been modified to be a stinger, she doesn't actually use it to deposit the eggs that it was originally designed to do. She directly deposits them into the bottom of the cell. Okay, any questions on that, going through very rapidly? I'm hoping that many of you have already been through a lot of this as far as, you know, worker, the drone, the queen, this kind of thing. Any questions at all? Okay. All right. We're going to jump ahead here. Oh, yeah. This phase of the development gets to be kind of important because in managing your colonies, what you really want is you want to be the hive to be at its strongest at the beginning of the honey flow, so that you get the most honey out of the honey flow, obviously. But to do that, you have to know how long it takes for certain things to happen. So say you want to decide whether or not you want to buy a queen or you want to just let them raise their own queen. Well, you need to, if they raise their own queen, how long is that going to take? And so knowing the phases of development and how long they take becomes important in managing the hive. Now, the eggs, of course, are laid first, and they're laid in the bottom of the hive, and they're tiny. People call them grains of rice, but they're much tinier than a grain of rice, actually. They're a little hard to see. We tend to use plastic foundation, and it's black. And the reason is you can see the eggs a lot easier than you can otherwise. And the eggs are vertical. They're laid one to a cell normally. And after 3 days, they fall over and hatch. And when I say hatch, there's no like eggshell left. What actually happens is the larva emerges and kind of emits a little bit of a liquid that dissolves the membrane that was the outside of the egg and ingests it. So it doesn't even waste the shell of the egg, as it were. But that's how it okay. And then after it hatches, it becomes a larva, and it goes through, I think, what, 6 instar stages or 6 stages where it molting, basically. And it is just an eating machine. Like I said before, what was it, 1,500 times its weight by the time it grows. And so it just absorbs food like nothing on earth, I think. I mean, I don't know if anything else grows that fast. It's amazing. And then once it gets to the 5th instar, its last molding before it becomes a pupa, the bees cap that with, and then the bee or the larva spins a cocoon like any other insect, but it's a very flimsy, light little cocoon in there, and pupates. Once it gets done pupating, it does its last molting and comes out as an adult. Now, when we get to diseases and stuff, the mites really love the sealed brood. That is the point where the mites become a problem. It's where they live and where they propagate. So it's during that pupa stage that they become the issue. Okay, let me go here. I want to move this over. Okay, now we got some actual numbers here. If you're into the metric system, the eggs are only 1.7 millimeters long, and so that's pretty tiny. And once the egg tips over, and then it becomes the larva, it sheds its skin 5 times, as we mentioned. Now, if it's fed royal jelly for the first 3 days, and royal jelly is a mixture of a couple of excretions from glands, the mandibular gland and the hypopharyngeal gland. My pronunciations may not be great on some of these glands, but they get this royal jelly for 3 days. And then after that, they get fed a mixture of the royal jelly and some pollen mixed with saliva and honey, and they call it bee bread. And then they become this. They grow to this amazing 1,570 times their original size. And then 12 days after they're inside that cocoon, they emerge. Now, there's going to be a chart. Is it on here?
No.
Okay. There's a chart in your book.
Well,
Or in your, yeah,
in the manual.
in the manual. And it goes through these things. And remember, these things are important, but they're also not absolute fixed things. They're things that are dependent upon temperatures, like the larva. Did I write it down?
You have the
Okay. On mine, the egg that we say, for instance, hatches in 3 days. Well, if you actually start reading about it, the egg hatches in anywhere from 48 to 144 hours. So what I'm getting at is these are rough, but they're really good enough for bee management. An easy way to remember them is they're eggs for 3 days, and you double that, and they're larvae for 6 days. And you double that, and they're pupa for 12 days. And then you add all that together, and you get 21 days for a drone, for instance. So just remembering that 3, 6, and 12 gets you the drone, and the worker is just a couple of days short of that.
And the queen is short.
And the queen is shorter than that. She gets done in about 16 days. But you need to, so if you were going to do something like decide about requeening, for instance, so what do you, how long is it going to take you? You lost a queen, and what are you going to do? How long is it going to take you to get a new queen, or to get the hive up and running again? So first they have to find an egg or a larva that's less than 3 days old. And then they have to start feeding that to be a queen. We're talking about the workers producing a queen out of this egg or a young larva. And now it's going to take them 16 days to do that. So then that's a week and 2 days, or 2 weeks and 2 days. Now, once she hatches, she's got to gain some strength. She's got to dry out. She's got to get her wings functioning. So she isn't going to fly for 3-5 days, something like that. Now, once she starts flying, she's going to make some flights to the drone congregation area and get mated up to a dozen times. And after that, she comes back and she starts laying eggs. So now you're 3 weeks in, and now she's laying eggs, and it's going to take about 21 days for drones, and just say 21 days for a worker. So she's going to take another 3 weeks or to before you actually get any bees coming into your hive. And all the time between raising her, getting her ready to go, hatching eggs, the hive is going to be losing bees, right? Because normally if she's laying a couple thousand eggs a day, well, the hive isn't going to just, if it's going to maintain itself, that means there's going to be a couple thousand bees a day dying. So those bees are dying now, even while you're waiting for the production to come online with the new queen. So it's going to take you a while to get into production again. And do you have that much time before, say, the summer dearth comes on? If you don't, then maybe you should be buying a queen instead of trying to raise a queen. On the other hand, if you look in your hive and you see what? You see some queen cells and they're sealed, then you know that she's about to hatch anyway. So you can take off that first 2 weeks off of that time, because you're immediately going to have a queen. She still has to go through the rest of the process and raise the brood. Anyway, that's the phases of development. Any questions on? Yeah, okay.
And why this is important is if you look in your hive and you don't see any new eggs or fresh larvae, you know something's happened to your queen. But they could have already produced a queen or be in the process of producing one. So you need to investigate a little bit further, which is what Jack was getting at, before you decide that you need to buy a queen. Queens are running about $30 to $40 if you can find a local supplier that has some when you need one. And then you need to introduce her into the colony. And hopefully she's already a mated queen, but some of them are not. So you just really need to be aware of this developmental stage of the bees so you have an idea of what's going on. We've made the mistake a couple of times of assuming that we didn't have a queen in there because there was no new egg and new young larva. It was all capped brood. And instead we did have a queen in there that had emerged, and she was just getting started on her mating flights and hadn't started laying yet. So then we came up with 2 queens. We purchased one that we didn't need to. So even though this might seem laborious, it really is important when you get into your own hive management to understand how this development works.
Yeah, and you know, if you don't see eggs issue, you got to remember that if she's going to swarm, they're going to shut her down. The workers are going to shut her down. They're going to exercise her. They're not going to feed her. They're going to trim her down so that she can get to flying weight. And so no eggs may not be that the queen is bad. No eggs may be that they're getting ready to swarm. I'm going to have to run for a second. You take it. What you do?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Are there any questions about this at all? No questions. Okay.
You mentioned earlier that they'll remove the queen's markers off of them. Do you still mark your bees, or do you just try to find her?
Yeah, we don't bother marking them again. We look for the signs of a active queen, a productive queen in the hive, you know, brood pattern looking good, eggs, young larvae. So we try not to disturb the colony too much every time we're looking. If we're just doing a standard inspection, you know, nothing that has a big purpose behind it. So we try just to make sure life is okay and not too disruptive to that. Every time that you go in to a colony and pull out and inspect frame by frame, you're setting them back at least 3 days. So unless you've got, you know, a disease you're looking for, or you're suspicious that you had a swarm, or, you know, some of those more major questions, our general inspections, we try to limit very, very tightly. So we rarely, this is sort of embarrassing, but we rarely see the queen herself. As long as we see that she's been active in the past 3 days with, you know, egg or very young larva, we're happy campers. So that's how we do that. Any other questions along those lines? Okay. The other thing that's sort of this overall, this chapter 1 is sort of an overall look at honeybees. And one of the big topics, and in fact, a couple of you said you got into honeybees because of honey. That's what people think about when they think about honeybees. Why do you have honeybees? They think about, well, you get honey. And those of you that have kept bees for a little while know that that isn't always the case. It is wishful thinking, and you may in fact get honey, and you probably will at some point. But they produce, you know, they do a great job of pollination on most things. Mary, I think, is the one that said, or Jack, they don't do well on tomatoes. They don't do well on blueberries. There are many native vegetables that they don't do as well as some of our native pollinators, but they do extremely well on fruit trees, herbs, lots of different type of vegetation. They're an extremely effective pollinator. So pollination actually, interestingly enough, is now the highest money maker for commercial beekeepers. It's surpassed honey production, the money that commercial beekeepers get from their pollination services. And that's become a huge issue, especially, we'll get into that with diseases and some other things because of the monoculture issue and taking all the bees throughout the United States to California to pollinate the almond crop there. Other thing that is a good product from them that is used commercially is beeswax. Beeswax is used not just for wax for candle making and lip balms, but also is heavily used in the cosmetic industry. So be aware of that. If you are scraping a burr comb off of any of your frames, save that. Usually we have a can that we just have out by our hives. So when we're scraping off the comb and cleaning burr that get attached to this, save that because you can melt it down and form it into little bricks, and you can actually sell that, and it's quite valuable. So that just be aware instead of tossing it out. Also, if you just toss it out near your hives, it is an attractant for yellow jackets and bald-faced hornets. And so if you're scraping it off, do not leave it next to your hives, even if you don't save it. The propolis, people are using that. They make a lot of tinctures because of the antibiotic nature of propolis that the bees use, but also it's used in naturopathic medicines. We have a couple of beekeepers that make a special tincture out of it that they use whenever they get stung by a bee that they say reduces the pain and swelling. They've used it for cuts. Actually, there's a list of uses for that if you wish to get into that. So if you want to scrape off your propolis, you can gather that as well. And there's great recipes on the internet that are relatively easy to use for creating any of these products. Some people also collect pollen. I'm not a fan of that. This is where personal opinion comes in. I really want the bees to have the pollen for raising their brood and their young and not taking the pollen away, but there's actually pollen traps that you can set up at the entrance of your hives, and it knocks the pollen off of the pollen sacs, and you can then collect that and sell that also. Royal jelly is the one that I just sort of shake my head over. There is definitely a demand for it, but it does mean you're definitely taking something out of the hive that they need to feed their own bees, the queen especially. So if you're going to be taking royal jelly, know that you get excruciatingly little per colony, and you are definitely doing harm to your colony. So know what you're doing before you get into that. And then you need to have quite a few hives to make that a productive thing. But it is a product that some people do gather. And if you hear people talking about it, they aren't crazy. They just are raising bees in a different manner than most of us do. Any other questions about products? A lot of hobbyist beekeepers are getting into the beeswax for different type of lip balms or just balms of a variety of kinds. Once again, very easy to do, and something that the people that are doing it enjoy doing. They make great gifts and some of the people are actually selling them at farmers markets.
Actually, the cosmetic industry buys most of the beeswax.
Yeah,
Okay,
Sherry.
Sherry's got a hand up.
Ah, I just wanted to tell folks that when you get beeswax, it's hard as rock. If you want to make anything out of it, you got to add some other stuff. So, but I save all my beeswax, and it's not pretty, but it's hard as rock. It's so if you're going that direction, you got to look in. I forgot what else they mix in with it. Somebody told me to soften it.
I think
Isaiah?
it's oils. They mix in things like, well, when I've made little lip balm, it's olive oil that makes it a little more malleable. So,
Okay, stuff like that. Yeah. Okay.
The question I had, I think I missed it on one of the slides, is about how many hives do you need in an area to make sure your queen's mated correctly and not inbred?
Well, remember that she's going to fly off to a drone congregation area, and that drone congregation area is going to have drones from all over the place.
If I'm remembering correctly, Isaiah, and I probably should look this number up again, but it seems like the drone congregation area pulls from at least 10 miles. The drones, and they all the drones from whatever hive go to this one location. It's sort of a bizarre thing, and it's year after year, it's that same location. And it's usually at the edge of a field, between a field and a treed, area. So it's at the edge of one of those, so that, and I've never seen one. I would love to see one. So if you see one, please let me know.
Yeah, we're thinking about doing some beeline to see if we could follow some drones to find a drone congregation area, because you do see videos of places that have found them, and they'll do things like put a little pheromone on a balloon and let it go up, and the number of drones that show up is just staggering. But I've never seen one. I'd like to see one, and I don't know much more than that, actually.
But to get back to your question, how many hives are necessary to ensure that? I've never seen a statement to that effect. I know that on a couple of islands that they can control how many colonies are there, because they bring the colonies to this isolated area for a lot of scientific research for the genetic part of it. They're bringing in about 7 hives. No more than that if they wish, but 7 is the number that they're bringing in to make sure that they have enough drones to handle their 7 colonies. So that's the closest number that I can get for you. Does that help?
Yeah, no, yeah, because where our hives up are in 9 Mile, probably not this year, but in future years, we were probably going to let them raise their own queens, and I just wanted to make sure that we had enough hives that they would be at least mated correctly.
Yeah, it's not so much your hives, it's I'm in the area, but Mary is just waving like mad up there. We're curious to see what she's got.
well, I was going to point out that most places like where you have a hive in Spokane, you don't have to worry. There's lots of bees around there about even a single hive. They're going to find the genetic mix there. Whereas, for instance, here in St. John, where there are 2 beekeepers here, which to me is great because there's a little more genetic diversity, but this is a bee poor environment. And so I am concerned. I don't have any hope of developing a race of bees or a variety of bees that's going to do anything, because this is so bee poor and I have to buy bees. But for instance, up in 9 Mile, I think you've got beekeepers around you. You might check with Ari and see what kind of, well, population of beekeepers there are. But again, you very likely will have enough bees to keep your genetic diversity going. So anyway, that's my
I
observation.
agree with that assessment.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I've read a couple of articles. And I'll tell you what I've read. I'm not sure about this, but the queen can decide not to mate with a drone as well. And a couple of papers have said that that is, if it's from her own hive, her own colony, that she can elect not to let that drone mate with her. I don't know about that. I haven't seen that scientifically documented, but a couple of papers that I've read have said that they've seen a queen avoid a particular drone, and they've had them marked. This was one of those island experiments, and it was from her own colony.
Yeah, I've read the same thing, that they don't mate with their bees from their own colony, but I can't cite a paper on at this point. We didn't light up. Are they hearing us?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
So any other questions on chapter 1? Just out of curiosity, how many of you have had a chance to read the information in the manual so far on chapter 1 or 2? Okay. So a couple of you have. Okay. All right, Mary, we're going to pause between our chapters,
Mhm.
and we will let you let us know when we can unpause.
Okay.